The letter written by Pilate to the Roman Emperor Tiberius about Jesus contains astonishing descriptions that are not even found in the Gospels. In it, he mentions the miracles performed by Jesus, the trial, the crucifixion, and surprisingly, even his resurrection. But what exactly did this letter say? What might Pilate have communicated to the emperor about the resurrection of the Son of God? And how did he describe his appearance? Pilate begins the letter to Tiberius Caesar, the emperor, as follows. Greetings, Your Majesty. The recent events in my province have been so extraordinary that I felt the need to report everything in detail, as I believe these occurrences may, in the future, deeply affect the course of our nation. It seems as if all the gods have distanced themselves from us lately. I am almost convinced that the day I took Valerius' place in governing Judea was a cursed day, for since then, my life has been full of troubles and afflictions. As soon as I arrived in Jerusalem, I took charge of the praetorium and organized a grand banquet. I invited a tetrarch of Galilee, the high priest, and his officials, but at the appointed time, no one appeared. I saw this as an insult to my authority and to the Roman government. A few days later, the high priest came to visit me with a solemn and deceitful expression. He claimed that his religion did not allow him to sit at the table with Romans, but his gaze revealed that his words were false. Although I accepted his excuse, it was clear to me that he and his followers did not sympathize with the Romans. I advised the Romans to be cautious with the high priests of this land, for they would not hesitate to betray even their own mothers for power and wealth. Among all the conquered cities, Jerusalem is the hardest to control. The people are so rebellious that I live in constant fear of an uprising. I have few soldiers, just a centurion, and 100 men under my command. I requested reinforcements from the governor of Syria, but he told me he barely had enough soldiers to protect his own province. Our ambition for expansion seems to be beyond our ability to sustain what we have already conquered. I fear this may eventually lead to the downfall of our government. I have kept my distance from the people, fearing that the priests might influence the rebels. Even so, I have tried to understand the mindset and actions of these people. Among the many rumors that reached me, one in particular caught my attention. They spoke of a young man in Galilee who was preaching a new doctrine in the name of a God who had sent him. At first, I thought he might be trying to incite the people against us, but it soon became clear that this was not the case. Jesus of Nazareth seemed to be more favorable to the Romans than to the Jews. One day, as I passed through the square, I saw a large crowd gathered around a young man leaning against a tree, speaking calmly. I discovered that it was Jesus, which did not surprise me given the contrast between him and those who listened. I did not want to interrupt with my presence, so I continued on my way, but instructed my secretary to blend into the crowd and listen to what he was saying. My secretary, Manios, is the grandson of an old conspirator who awaited Catiline in Etruria for many years. He is well versed in Hebrew, loyal to me, and has my complete trust. When Manios returned to the praetorium, he reported Jesus' words to me. I have never seen anything in the works of philosophers that could compare to the wisdom he expressed. One of the rebellious Jews, of which there are many in Jerusalem, asked Jesus if it was right to pay taxes to Caesar. He replied, "Give to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's." It was this wisdom that led me to decide to let the Nazarene go free, even though I had the power to arrest or exile him. This is a hallmark of Roman governance. Jesus was neither an agitator nor a rebel. In a way, I offered him my protection, perhaps without his knowledge. He had the freedom to act, speak, gather with the people, choose his followers, and teach without any intervention from me to you. If one day, which the gods forbid, the religion of our ancestors is replaced by that of Jesus, it will be this tolerance that leads to the fall of Rome. Meanwhile, I, an unfortunate instrument, will have been part of what the Jews call providence and we call destiny. This freedom I granted to Jesus troubled the wealthier and more influential Jews. Jesus was direct with them, and for me that was a reason to let him remain free. To the scribes and Pharisees, he would say, "You are like serpents, whitewashed tombs, beautiful on the outside, but inside full of decay." On other occasions, he criticized local traditions, stating that humility was more valued in the eyes of God than any position of prestige. Almost every day, I received complaints at the Praetorium about Jesus' bold actions. I was warned that something bad could happen to him, and that Jerusalem had a history of stoning those who proclaimed themselves prophets. An appeal to Caesar was being prepared, but the Senate accepted my actions and promised reinforcements after the Persian War, as I did not have enough troops to prevent a rebellion. I then decided to take steps to restore peace in the city without resorting to extreme measures. I sent a letter to Jesus asking him to come to the Praetorium for a conversation. He accepted the request. Being of Spanish and Roman origin, I am not easily moved or intimidated. But when Jesus appeared, I was on the balcony, and it felt as if my feet were glued to the marble floor. My whole body trembled, as if bearing the weight of guilt, while the Nazarene remained serene, with a calmness that seemed to reflect pure innocence. As he approached, he stopped, and with a subtle gesture, seemed to say, "I am here," without uttering a single word. For a moment, I stood there, amazed and impressed by this man, a type our artists have never envisioned when creating figures of gods and heroes. There was nothing repulsive about him, yet I felt old and frail, too weak to draw near. With a hesitant voice, I said, "Jesus of Nazareth." Jesus of Nazareth, for the past 3 years, I have granted you total freedom to express your ideas, and I do not regret it. Your words are practical and full of wisdom. I do not know if you have read Socrates or Plato, but I perceive that the simplicity and majesty of your speech place you far above these philosophers. The Emperor knows this, and as his representative here, I am pleased to have given you this freedom that you so deserve. I must warn you, however, that your words have attracted powerful and misguided enemies. Socrates also made enemies and eventually fell into their hands. Your adversaries are even more agitated, attacking you because of the firmness of your words and me for allowing you to speak freely. Some have even suggested that I am conspiring with you to weaken the little civil power that Rome still grants the Jews. My recommendation, and not an order, is that you be more cautious and moderate in your speeches from now on, considering that your opponents may use pride to incite the ignorant people against you, thus forcing me to act according to the law. Jesus responded calmly, "Governor, your words do not come from true wisdom. Ask the mountain to stop in the middle of the valley, and it will answer that it obeys the laws of nature and the Creator God. Only He knows where the waters flow. I tell you the truth, before the rose of Sharon blooms, the blood of the righteous will be shed." "Your blood will not be shed," I replied, moved. "I consider you more valuable for your wisdom than all those rebellious Pharisees who abuse the freedom the Romans have granted them. They conspire against Caesar and speak ill of him, leading the people to believe that he is a tyrant who seeks their destruction. These ungrateful ones do not realize that sometimes the wolf dresses in sheep's clothing to achieve its evil purposes. I will protect you from them. My praetorium will be a safe refuge for you, both day and night." Jesus, still calm, shook his head and with a serene smile said, "When the time comes, there will be no shelter for the Son of Man, neither on earth nor beneath it. The true refuge is in the heavens." Pointing upward, he added, "What was written by the prophets will be fulfilled." Apprehensive, I replied, "You are forcing me to turn my request into an order. The safety of this province, which is under my responsibility, demands it. You must moderate your speeches. Do not disregard this order, for you know the consequences. May peace be with you." "To God, Prince of the earth," Jesus replied, "I did not come into the world to bring unrest, but rather peace, love, and kindness. I was born on the same day that Augustus Caesar brought peace to the Roman Empire. The persecutions do not come from me, but I expect to face them, brought by others, in obedience to the will of my Father, who has shown me the path to follow. Therefore, it is not within your power to control my words or keep the victim on the altar of atonement." With that, he walked away like a gentle light behind the curtains of the horizon, and I felt immense relief, for his presence seemed to be a burden I could not bear. Herod, who was ruling at the time and had grown old, allied himself with the enemies of Jesus to execute his revenge. If it had been up to Herod alone, he would have ordered Jesus' death immediately. But despite his pride in his royal position, he hesitated to do anything that might compromise his influence with the Senate. Or perhaps, like me, he also feared Jesus. But it would not be fitting for a Roman official to admit fear of a Jew. Herod came to the praetorium to visit me, and as he stood to leave after a rather trivial conversation, he asked me what I thought of the Nazarene. I told him that Jesus seemed to me to be one of the great thinkers that a great nation sometimes produces, and that his teachings were not connected to political matters. Rome had decided to let him speak freely because his actions did not justify any intervention. Herod gave me a sarcastic smile and, with an ironic bow, took his leave. The great Jewish feast, Passover, was approaching, and there was an intention to take advantage of the popular fervor that always filled the city. Jerusalem was packed with a noisy crowd, clamoring for the death of Jesus. My informants said that the temple treasury had been used to bribe the people. The danger was imminent, and a Roman centurion had been publicly disrespected. I sent a letter to the procurator of Syria, requesting reinforcements, 100 infantry soldiers and 100 cavalry. But he refused. I found myself isolated with a small group of veterans in a hostile city, unable to contain an uprising, and with no choice but to tolerate the situation. The cries were relentless. "Crucify him! Crucify him!" At that moment, three major groups united against Jesus: the Herodians, the Sadducees, and the Pharisees. The ambiguous stance of the Herodians and Sadducees seemed to have two reasons. They hated Jesus and, at the same time, were tired of Roman domination. They never forgave me for entering the holy city with banners bearing the image of the Roman emperor. And although I made a grave mistake on that occasion, to them, the sacrilege still seemed unforgivable. Another dispute was also growing among them. I had suggested using part of the temple treasury to fund public works, and this proposal was met by the Pharisees, who were already opponents of Jesus, as something unacceptable. They did not care about the government and harbored resentment over the harsh criticism that the Nazarene had directed at them for 3 years, everywhere he went. Besides these groups, I still had to deal with the unruly and unpredictable population, always ready to join a revolt and take advantage of the chaos that might arise. In light of this, Jesus was brought before the high priest and condemned to death. It was then that Caiaphas, the high priest, took an act of apparent submission, sending Jesus to me so that I could confirm the sentence and ensure his execution. I responded that, since Jesus was from Galilee, the case should be judged by Herod, and I ordered them to take him to him. Herod, in turn, displaying a false humility and declaring deference to the representative of Caesar, sent Jesus back to me, leaving the responsibility in my hands. Soon my palace became a besieged fortress, with the number of dissenters growing by the moment. Jerusalem was filled with crowds descending from the mountains of Nazareth. It seemed as though all of Judea was gathering in the city. A Gaulish seer, who claimed to foresee the future, threw herself at my feet, weeping, and warned me, "Do not touch that man, for he is holy." Last night, I saw him in a vision, walking on the waters, flying on the wings of the wind. He spoke to the storm and to the fish of the lake, and they all obeyed him. I saw the river on Mount Catherine run with blood, the statues of Caesar weeping, and the morning sun looked like a mourning virgin. If you do not heed the pleas of your wife, a great evil awaits you. Fear the curse of the Roman Senate. Fear the thrones of Caesar. At that moment, the marble steps of the Praetorium trembled under the weight of the crowd. When they brought Jesus back to me, I went to the courts of justice, surrounded by the guard, and firmly asked the crowd what they wanted. They responded that they wanted the death of Jesus. "What is his crime?" I asked. "He blasphemed, prophesied the destruction of the temple, and declared himself the Son of God, the Messiah, the King of the Jews." I replied that Roman justice does not condemn anyone to death for such accusations, but the cries of "Crucify him! Crucify him!" echoed deafening through the furious crowd, shaking the palace walls. Of all those present, the only one who seemed calm was Jesus. After several failed attempts to protect him from the fury of his enemies, I resorted to a measure that seemed to be the only way to save his life. I proposed, as was customary at the time, to release a prisoner during the festivities, allowing Jesus to go free. However, the people insisted on demanding his crucifixion. I tried to argue, pointing out that their actions were inconsistent with their own laws. I explained that, according to Jewish law, no judge could condemn a defendant without first fasting for an entire day, and that the sentence required the consent of the Sanhedrin and the signature of its president. Moreover, by law, no execution could take place on the same day the sentence was given. On the following day, which would be the day of execution, the Sanhedrin was to review the entire process. It was also required that a man stand at the gate of the court with a flag, while another, mounted on horseback, announced the name of the condemned, the crime committed, and the names of the witnesses, asking if anyone could testify in his favor. The prisoner, on the way to execution, had the right to return up to 3 times to present new arguments in his defense. I insisted on these points, hoping to calm them, but the cries of "Crucify him!" persisted. So, I ordered that Jesus be scourged, thinking this might suffice, but it only fueled their hatred. I requested a basin and washed my hands before that enraged crowd, declaring that, in my judgment, Jesus of Nazareth had done nothing deserving of death. My words were in vain. The fate of Jesus was already sealed. I have witnessed the fury of crowds during civil riots, but nothing compared to what happened that day. It seemed as though all the spirits from the depths of hell had gathered in Jerusalem. The crowd did not walk. It was dragged and spun like a whirlwind, moving in furious waves from the gates of the Praetorium to Mount Zion, with cries and shouts that surpassed any agitation I had ever witnessed during uprisings in Pannonia or the Forum. The day gradually grew dark, like a winter twilight, reminiscent of what happened during the death of Julius Caesar. Coincidentally, it was also the Ides of March. I, the governor of a rebellious province, stood in a corner of my basilica, watching the grim scene as the innocent Nazarene was led to his execution. Everything around me was deserted. Jerusalem had emptied its inhabitants through the mournful gates leading to Jamnia. An air of sadness and desolation pervaded everything. My soul was bound to Calvary, and the centurion struggled to maintain order amid the chaos. I was alone, and a weight on my heart told me that what was unfolding there was more a drama of the gods than of men. The sounds of agony came from Golgotha, carried by the wind, as if announcing a suffering never before heard by human ears. Dark clouds gathered over the temple and spread across the city, covering it like a dark veil, with visible signs both in the sky and on the earth. It is said that Dionysius, the patriarch, exclaimed, "Either the Creator is suffering, or the universe is dissolving." While these terrifying phenomena were occurring, a violent earthquake shook Lower Egypt, causing panic and nearly killing the superstitious Jews with fear. Balthazar, a learned Jew from Antioch and a close friend of the Nazarene, was found dead after the earthquake. Whether his death was caused by fright or sorrow, no one knows. Around the first hour of the night, I wrapped myself in my cloak and went down to the city, making my way to the gates of Golgotha. The sacrifice had been completed. The crowd was returning to their homes, still agitated, but with a somber air of remorse for what they had witnessed. I also saw my small Roman court passing by in silence, downcast. The standard bearer had covered the eagle as a sign of mourning. I heard some Jewish soldiers murmuring strange words that I did not understand, while others spoke of miracles similar to those the Romans usually associated with their gods. At certain moments, groups of men and women would stop and look back at Mount Calvary, as if they were expecting some new sign. I returned to the praetorium with a heavy heart, climbing the steps still marked by the blood of the Nazarene. I noticed an old man kneeling in a posture of supplication, surrounded by Romans who were weeping. He threw himself at my feet and sobbed deeply. Seeing an old man cry is always painful, and my heart, already burdened with sorrow, was even more moved. We cried together, and it seemed that everyone there, both him and many in the crowd, was on the verge of breaking down in tears. I had never seen anything like it. People who had betrayed, sold, and shouted against him, those who had called for his crucifixion, disappeared like cowards. I was told that these men silenced their mouths with vinegar, alluding to what Jesus mentioned about the resurrection and the separation of the dead. If this truly happened, it was there, before that immense crowd. "Father," I asked, after managing to compose myself, "who are you and what do you seek?" "I am Joseph of Arimathea," he replied, "and I have come to ask for permission to bury Jesus of Nazareth." I granted his request and ordered that some soldiers accompany the burial, ensuring that the body would not be desecrated. A few days later, the tomb was found empty, and the disciples began to proclaim that Jesus had risen just as he had predicted. This caused even more commotion than his own death. I cannot say for certain what truly happened, but I conducted a thorough investigation into this matter. You can verify for yourself and decide if I made any mistakes, as Herod suggests. Joseph used his own tomb to bury Jesus, but whether he knew or planned anything regarding the resurrection, I cannot affirm. The day after the burial, a priest came to the praetorium, concerned that the disciples might attempt to steal Jesus' body to make it appear as though he had risen, as he had foretold, and in which they firmly believed. I referred him to the captain of the guard, Marcus, instructing him to place Jewish soldiers around the tomb, as many as were needed, so that if anything happened, the blame would fall on them and not on the Romans. When the news of the empty tomb spread, my concern grew. I sought out Marcus, who reported that he had assigned his lieutenant, Benam, along with 100 soldiers to guard the site. He told me that Isam and his men were terrified by the events of the morning. I summoned Isam, who gave me the most faithful account of what had happened. He said that around the beginning of the fourth watch, a soft and beautiful light appeared over the tomb. At first, he thought that some women had come to embalm the body of Jesus, as was the custom, but he could not understand how they had gotten past the guards. While trying to make sense of the situation, the entire area was suddenly filled with an intense light, and he saw what appeared to be a multitude of the dead, wrapped in shrouds, all looking younger and more radiant, while a heavenly melody, the most beautiful he had ever heard, filled the air. It was as if the air was laden with voices praising God. Suddenly the ground began to tremble and shake so violently that he felt weak, unable to stand, as if the earth was moving beneath his feet, and he eventually lost consciousness. Not knowing what had happened next, I asked him what state he was in when he regained consciousness. He replied that he was lying on the ground, face down. I questioned whether he might have mistaken the light, thinking it was the dawn in the east. He explained that at first, he thought so too, but at a short distance, it was still very dark, and he remembered it was too early for the day to break. I asked if the dizziness could have been caused by standing up too quickly, as this sometimes causes such a sensation. He denied it, saying that he had not slept the entire night, as the punishment for sleeping on duty was death. He mentioned that he had allowed some of the soldiers to rest at that hour, and that some were still sleeping. I asked how long what he saw lasted. He could not say precisely, but he estimated that it lasted almost an hour until it was overshadowed by the light of day. I asked if he went to the tomb after regaining his senses. He said no, as he was frightened, and as soon as the reinforcements arrived, they all returned to the barracks. I asked if the priests had interrogated him. He confirmed that they had, saying that the priests wanted him to claim it was an earthquake and that the guards were sleeping. They offered money for him to say that the disciples had come and taken Jesus' body, but he stated that he had not seen any disciples and only learned that the body was missing when he was told. I inquired about the personal opinions of the priests he spoke with, and he said that some believed Jesus was not an ordinary man, that he was not a human being like others, and that he was not merely the son of Mary, as was said, but rather a figure who had been on earth before, in the times of Abraham and Lot, and in many other moments and places. If the Jewish theory is correct, these conclusions seem to make sense, as they align with what we know about the life of this man. It is widely acknowledged, both by friends and foes, that Jesus seemed to have a command over the elements, like a craftsman molding clay in his hands. He turned water into wine, healed diseases, raised the dead, calmed storms, and even called forth fish with coins in their mouths. If he was able to perform all these things and more, as witnessed by the Jews, and it was precisely by doing so that he stirred such enmity, it is clear that he was not accused of committing crimes, violating laws, or causing harm to anyone. These events are known to thousands, both those who followed him and those who opposed him. I am inclined to believe, as someone said at the foot of the cross, truly, this was the Son of God. Pontius Pilate described Jesus as an impressive and distinct figure, unlike any other. He was said to be a man of average stature, with a calm demeanor and a serene presence that drew everyone around him. His face was marked by an expression of kindness and peace, conveying calm even in the most difficult situations. Jesus always seemed to look at people with compassion, as if he deeply understood each one of them. Accounts say that he had long, soft hair, falling harmoniously over his shoulders. His hair was described as slightly wavy and of a color that varied between light brown and blonde, standing out among the local population. His eyes were one of his most remarkable features, described as deep and penetrating, with a shade that ranged from light brown to blue, depending on who narrated. His eyes conveyed a sense of wisdom, kindness, and at the same time, a firmness that seemed to understand everything about life and the human heart. Jesus' skin was described as fair, with a smooth texture, like that of someone who worked outdoors, but still maintained a healthy and well-cared-for appearance. His face was considered beautiful and harmonious, with features that inspired trust and reverence. It was not just any face, but one that emanated authority without being threatening or stern. He wore a full, well-groomed beard, which gave him an appearance of maturity and respect. Jesus always dressed simply but with dignity. His clothing was modest yet clean, usually consisting of a long cloak and a tunic. He did not wear flashy accessories or jewelry, which reflected his detachment from material things. His appearance conveyed a message of humility and simplicity, even amidst his striking presence. He was someone who, without needing to say a word, could convey a sense of peace and warmth. Now, noble sovereign, this is the most faithful account I can present regarding the case. I have taken care to describe everything in detail so that you may judge my conduct fairly, for I know that many criticisms have been directed at me concerning this matter. With promises of loyalty and respect to my sovereign, I remain your most obedient servant. The narrative surrounding Pilate's letter remains a fascinating topic, especially because it offers a rare and vivid portrayal of Jesus' physical attributes and behavior. Unlike the Gospels, which focus more on his teachings and actions, this letter, real or imagined, presents a humanized and detailed image of the man who would become a central figure in world history. Pilate's descriptions paint a picture that invites readers to envision Jesus not just as a spiritual leader, but as someone whose presence left a lasting impression, even on those who did not follow his teachings. The idea of a Roman governor being compelled to write such a letter to the emperor adds a layer of complexity to the story. Why would Pilate, a representative of Rome's power, find it necessary to describe this man in such detail? Some speculate that it was to justify his actions, to explain the reasons behind the crucifixion of a figure who seemed in many ways harmless and even wise. Others see it as an attempt to protect his own reputation, distancing himself from the growing controversies surrounding the execution. Regardless of its origins, the letter has sparked endless debates among historians, theologians, and believers. Some argue that this description could not have been fabricated, as it aligns with certain traditions that speak of Jesus' humble yet commanding presence. Others view it as a piece of creative writing, a way to fill the gaps left by historical records, adding depth to the story of Jesus as perceived by different cultures and eras. For those seeking to find a physical image of Jesus, Pilate's letter becomes a tempting source. It provides details, such as the color of his hair, the expression of his eyes, and the calmness of his demeanor, that are rarely found elsewhere. These details may not be verifiable, but they allow the imagination to wander, offering a glimpse of how a man could inspire such devotion, fear, and fascination across different spheres of life. What makes this letter even more intriguing is how it bridges the gap between the Roman perspective and the emerging Christian narrative. It offers a window into how Jesus was perceived by someone who had the power to determine his fate, a man who ultimately played a crucial role in the most famous trial in history. Whether it was written to glorify, justify, or simply report, Pilate's letter leaves a legacy of questions and mysteries. As you reflect on these possibilities, remember that truth is often hidden beneath layers of myths, legends, and history. What we know and what we wish to know may never fully align, but that is what makes stories like this so compelling. They invite us to explore, debate, and imagine. Could there have been a letter? Could these words be a reflection of a deeper truth, or are they simply an addition to a growing legend? Leave a comment. What did you think of Pilate's letter in the video? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Subscribe to Spirituality Encounter for more journeys through the most captivating mysteries of history. With each story, we uncover new questions and hidden answers. Click on the next video to explore another fascinating mystery.